Deitz. Dan, for the record, please give your date and place of birth.
I was born March 26, 1950 in Anchorage, Alaska.
Okay, and talk a little bit about your life up to when you went into the Army.
Okay, well, like I said, I was born in Anchorage, Alaska. My father was a Army guy, and he was a soldier, and he was stationed in Puerto Rico. And my mother was from Puerto Rico, and that's where they met, and that's where they got married. And subsequently, my father and mother, they moved back to Alaska after he ended his service time, and went to Homer, Alaska, which is just kind of, it's south of Anchorage, Alaska, and that's where the family homestead was. And my grandparents actually homesteaded Homer in the very early days, late 1800s, early 1900s. And that's where they raised 11 boys and girls, and my father was one of those. I pretty much grew up in Anchorage, and I had two older brothers at the time, and Anchorage was kind of a military town. It had Elmendorf Air Force Base and Fort Richardson Army Base that was just outside of Anchorage. So we had a lot of contact with people that were in the military, and a lot of people that lived in and around the community were from either the Air Force or the Army. So we had quite a bit of contact. And then on top of that, a lot of my uncles were also in the military during the time. Well, as it was, I went to school there and grew up there, had a chance to do a lot of fishing and things, because it was the last frontier, and that's truly what it was at the time, because we had pretty much free reign. We kind of went out in our little adventures around the countryside and around Anchorage, and between all the boys in the neighborhood and stuff, we used to just have a great time. Clear up to fishing in a little creek that ran across the street from where we lived, to going up on the wharf where all the ships would come in with all from the fishing fleets. So that's kind of the scenario, or how I grew up. After that, in 1961, we packed up and moved down to a place called Eugene, Oregon, and that's basically where I finally grew up, and ultimately ended up in the military. Graduated from, actually I went to 3 different high schools because we moved a lot. My parents separated by then. I was we were pretty much on our own with my mother, and after that, Vietnam War came along, and the draft was in full force, and pretty quick my oldest brother got drafted, and he went through basic training in Fort Lewis, and he ended up in Germany as a signal operator. My other brother, second oldest brother, he got drafted and went through basic in Fort Lewis and ended up at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and went through Tiger Land down there, and he ended up in Vietnam. Shortly after that, I got drafted, and but after I graduated from high school, I ended up getting married to my wife, Janice, and she's still my wife today.
So almost 50 years later.
49 years this month.
Wow.
And so she's still my wife. We're still married. She's put up with me. And anyway, got drafted. I went through basic training, and I had the great opportunity of transferring all the way across the parade field at Fort Lewis instead of across the country like my brothers did. And went through infantry AIT at Fort Lewis. It's kind of unique in the fact that going through infantry training at Fort Lewis at the time, because I went in September, and by the time I got into advanced infantry training, it was February at Fort Lewis, and I went through Vietnam orientation in the VC village at Fort Lewis in 4.5 feet of snow. So that was my jungle orientation before I went to Vietnam. I got real fortunate. I got a little bit of leave, got to spend some time at home, and shortly after that, I went back to Fort Lewis, hit the replacement depot, went back up to McCord, or actually we went through the replacement depot, and we flew out of the Boeing field just out of SeaTac.
What year did you go in there?
I went in the Army in 1968.
68?
68. And
what month?
September. And by February of 1969, I was in Vietnam. And it was kind of interesting because, I think everybody kind of went through the same thing, and especially out of, where you had a Air Force base right fairly close to your Army post. All the C-141s would be flying over, and all our drill instructors would say, well, okay, there's another plane load of caskets coming in from Vietnam. And so that really, that was one of those sick jokes that they were always playing on you. And so ultimately, we flew out of there, and in mid-February, I landed in Vietnam. Went in through Long Binh, and went through the replacement depot there, and this was February of '69, which was a year after the Tet of '68. However, there was another Tet that was in the brewing, but we didn't know this, but it was ultimately going to be out in the field. It wasn't going to be in the cities this time. And so from Long Binh, I got assigned to the 25th Infantry Division. And that's when I got sent to the division headquarters, which was out of Cu Chi in Vietnam. Now, Cu Chi is not too far from the Cambodian border. It's kind of halfway between the coast and the border. And so most of the operations were north of Saigon and north of Cu Chi and along like I said, along the Cambodian border. And so actually from there I got assigned to 2nd Battalion, 27th Infantry Division, Charlie Company, and I went to 2nd Platoon. And it was kind of a bad time for the company at the time, because they got hit pretty hard out at a fire base called Firebase Diamond, and it was out on the Cambodian border. And basically, all of us guys coming in at that time, we were the replacements for those guys that were killed or injured or wounded during those battles along the Cambodian border during Tet of '69. It was also kind of an interesting thing, because as soon as we got assigned to our company area, that was the year that Cu Chi got hit by a bunch of sapper attacks coming in through the tunnels that were actually dug into and under the perimeter of Cu Chi. And during that time, they hit pretty much most of the major resupply points. They hit the fuel depot. They hit the runway. I can't remember. It was over 30 choppers that they blew up on the runway. And in the morning light, when we got up and really realized what was going on, it was you take a look at what's going on in Cu Chi, and everything was ablaze. You could see the smoke coming off from the fuel depots, and it's just plumes of smoke coming up everywhere along, all through Cu Chi. Well, cleaning up after that, they sent us out into the field, and we linked up with our companies and our platoons, and there was 7 or 8 or 9 of us that got reassigned to 2nd Platoon, and that was one of the platoons that was just pretty much decimated on the Cambodian border. And so now we were the new guys trying to get put together with all the old guys, and it's the usual thing. Is it's a whole lot different back in Vietnam than it is now, where the units going over into combat zones now are going over as units. They weren't going over as replacements, and so they had that ability to work together. Well, this is now you got new guys coming in, working with the old guys, and now they had to train you up and try to integrate you into their way of operations instead of training as unit, which I think in many cases made it very difficult for a lot of people to make transitions. And as a result of that, I think we lost a lot of good people that probably didn't need to lose and things like that. But you know, in the long run, I got to say I'm probably one of the luckiest guys in the world, because I'm one of the few people that served a combat tour in Vietnam and never got wounded. I should say, never got more than the Band-Aid wound that would have qualified for any serious injury or, you know, something like that. So after I got back, well, I stayed there, and after a period of time, I had a chance to go to the rear, or went back for a medical appointment, a dental appointment. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was back in the rear and didn't get a chance to get back out to the unit right away because we were weathered in for a while. And so I was I'd been in country for over 7 months at the time, and so we were sent around different places through Cu Chi doing details, and I went down to brigade headquarters. And at that time, we were building wooden sidewalks for a colonel, and somebody had a captain come out and ask if anybody knew how to type. I'm standing right there, and I said, well, I can type. You know, I can type. And he said, well, come on in. He gave me a piece of paper, and he says, here, type this. He looked at it, and he says, here, type this. So I typed it out, and he says, okay, here, type this. So the rest of the afternoon, I spent my time in the office working for the brigade colonel in their S1 office, and typing all kinds of stuff that afternoon. Well, I packed up my stuff at the end of the day, went back to my company area, and getting ready to fly back out to the border, and we fall out the next morning for reassignment, and they pulled me out of the formation. I couldn't, what the hell's going on? And come to find out that that captain had requested that I be reassigned to brigade headquarters. And so the next 4.5, 5 months I spent at brigade headquarters working for the S1. But I spent the rest of my tour doing that, and you know, it was pretty uneventful the rest of the time that I spent. And so anyway, came back through Oakland, and got reassigned to 1st Armored Division down in Fort Hood, Texas. That was actually kind of fun because I was mechanically inclined and I got assigned to a tank company. When I got to the company, they were transitioning out of the M60s to the M60A1s, which was quite a step up. And it was kind of fun because I was mechanically inclined. You had to work on them all the time. And I thought it was really kind of cool that I didn't have to walk anymore to get anywhere. But, you know, sometimes I think I worked probably harder as a tanker. And I was real fortunate in the fact that I got there at a time. I was an E4 when I got there, and they put me in a tank commander's position, and I got promoted as a 11 Echo tank commander. So I changed my MOS from 11B to 13 Echo. I thought that was pretty cool. Well, I did the rest of my time, and I stayed the entire. Served my time, and I got off active duty. And
when did you get out for that?
71. 71, late 71, September 71.
So you were in was it
2 years. Yeah, Fort Hood. Yeah, well, a year at Fort Hood.
Okay.
Well, once we took a little break, so I was going to segue back because we had a little conversation about the fact that I could type, and you know, because what respectable young boy is going to want to learn how to type? Well, obviously nowadays that's, you know, everybody keyboards and stuff, but back then we had an opportunity to take an elective in junior high school when I was in junior high school of typing, and so I decided I was going to take typing, and all my buddies are laughing and joking. Well, why would you want to take typing in junior high school? Well, that's where all the girls are. So that's why I went into typing. And so it kind of gave me an idea, you know, the opportunity to hang out with all the girls once in a while. So anyway, going back to my service. After I got off active duty, I decided it was time to go to school. Take the opportunity to take advantage of the GI Bill. And so I did, and I started going to the local community college in Eugene. primarily because I didn't have the grades in high school to take me directly into a university. So I took the opportunity to go to the community college, Lane Community College. And at the time, my goal was I wanted to be a shop teacher because I enjoyed working. I wanted to be a mechanic. I wanted to work on cars. I enjoyed working with my hands. And my goal was to transfer to Oregon State University, which I ultimately did. And I graduated from their School of Education under Industrial Arts. Shortly after that, I had the opportunity I got hired by, God, I can't even think of the school district name.
Was it Portland?
No, initially it was down at, Eagle Point School District. And I started teaching there, and I was a little bit dismayed when I got hired because, first of all, they really didn't have a program, and then second of all, they ended up shutting down the school district because they didn't have any money. And so now I find myself unemployed, and now I'm supposed to be teaching this shop program, and they don't have any money to run the program, so I was lucky enough to get hired by Portland School District. Well, I taught a year at Portland School District, and once again, it was an extracurricular or an extra curricular program that they were putting on, and they cut my position from the program. So once again, I find myself unemployed. And at the time I was going through this, or when I was still going to school, though, I had the opportunity. I met a young man at Lane Community College when I was going there, and there was we were taking some of the same classes together, and I was talking to him, saying, you know, I'm really thinking about getting into a reserve program because he was in the military. I knew he was in the military. I'm really thinking about getting into a reserve program or something to, do something more with my life. Because I got more to do, or more to add, something else I want to do. But I was looking around, and I never really found anything that really sparked my interest. And as I was talking to him, a young man by the name of John Bash, he says, "Well, have you ever thought about jumping out of airplanes?" I said, "No. Why would I want to jump out of airplanes?" And he says, "Well, have you ever thought about special forces?" And I says, "It's absolutely no way. That's not the kind of guy. I'm not made up that way." And he says, "No." He said, "I think you are." And so we talked a little bit, and he says, "Yeah." He says, he says, "I belong to this unit, 12 Special Forces Group." And he says, "And they have a company headquarters in Portland, Oregon." And he started explaining to me what was going on. He says, "You are going to have to go to school. You're going to have to go through training. You're going to have to get qualified. And it's going to take a lot of work to get that done." But he says, I think you're the kind of guy that would fit into that job skill."
Now this happened all when you were at Lane.
At Lane Community College, yeah.
And that had to be around
72. Well, finally he talked long and hard enough, and talked me into going up to Portland for an interview. Because at that time they actually had an interview process. They didn't just accept anybody to come into the unit. And so I went up and I met with the company commander, the sergeant major, a couple of the team commanders, and things like that, and they interviewed me. And they also had a battery of tests, and I had to take the Special Forces test battery that they had at the time. And I qualified very well, and apparently I passed the interview. And they said, if you want it, we'll give you a chance. And took the opportunity, and with the blessing of my wife, because I was married before I actually even went to Vietnam. We got married right out of high school. And with the blessing of my wife, she says, "Yeah, go for it, do it." And that's how I started my Special Forces career. Everybody said, "Oh yeah, you can join the Army Reserve and get into Special Forces. It's really easy to do." Well, after I kind of got involved in it, I'm thinking, well, it might have been easier to go to active duty and go through the whole course at the same time, because every time I turned around, you're going to one phase or the next phase, and you had to stay fit between each one of the phases that you went to. And I think in many cases it made it harder to do it that way. And so anyway, I went to went to jump school and did all my training that I needed to do, and they had a bunch of correspondence courses we had to do. But the best part about it was still had an opportunity to work with a team, and had some great commanders, had some great people I got to work with. They took me under my wing, or took me under their wing, and they helped me through the program. And ultimately, in 1973, I graduated from the course, and had the I mean, obviously once I was there, I was having a lot of fun. It was great. Had some part-time jobs. I really didn't have a job because I was going through all this training, and it was kind of hard to really commit to signing up for anything and going out and looking for a teaching job. But by the time I was doing this, I'm thinking, I don't know that I really have the personality to be a teacher anymore, because I was more of a type A person than I was a teacher person, even though I know in Special Forces a lot of what we did was teaching. And so, and a lot of the guys that I met through Special Forces were police officers, and all of a sudden they're saying, well, why don't you come to work for us? Why don't you come to do this? Why don't you why don't you become a cop? And that's when I thought, well, maybe I should. Because once again, I had some great people looking at me and saying, you have potential. Take advantage of it. And so I did. And I first got into a police reserve academy and program and started doing training. The more I got involved in it, the more I figured this is a great way to do. Got to go back a little bit and think a bit, and I told a story here a little bit ago, is had a hard time making the transition of you ought to be a cop to when I tell people, well, once I became a cop, well, I started my police career at age 13 because that's when I took my first ride in a police car. Well, once I got in the reserve program, I really liked the front seat better. It was so much better. But as it turned out, I ended up going to work as a full-time police officer for the city of Salem, Oregon. And I started out as a recruit police officer in 1979. And as a matter of fact, that was my Christmas present. I got the call on December 27th that I got the job with the Salem Police Department. And as it went from there, I served as a patrol officer. I worked in the schools with kids for a while, for 4 years. I spent 4 years as a motorcycle cop. And during that time, because of some of the things that I did through Special Forces, and some of the training and some of the people that we met and some of the extra schools that I got to go through, we were developing a SWAT team at the police department at the time, and I was one of the first people that was selected to be on that SWAT team because of the skills that I had through the military. I knew the tactics, I knew the weapons, I knew the systems. I was still a 11B guy at the time, and so it gave me an opportunity to work with those folks to help put this program together. And so I was initially, it was more of an emergency response team more than it was a SWAT team at the time. But ultimately we developed it into a full-fledged 100% SWAT team. Even though it was not a full-time job, it was an extra collateral duty of being a police officer above and beyond. And it really helped out. The other thing is through the reserve system, I had the opportunity to go through the Special Operations Sniper course, and so I was, as it turned out, I became one of the snipers for the SWAT team, and ultimately, after I got promoted, I became the team leader of our police sniper team. And which, great because I had the opportunity to go through the FBI sniper course and the Oregon State Police sniper course, and so I had a lot of opportunity took the opportunity to get a lot of additional training above and beyond that. While still doing that, I was still in the Army Reserve, and And again, taking the opportunities that came along, I got my promotions. I went from being a 11B weapons sergeant to being an intel sergeant, and then ultimately, and again, it's one of those things that, when you get hired on, I said, well, first of all, what do you think about special forces? Well, I don't think I can do special forces, but then you ultimately find out you can. And then once you get there, you're in awe of the guy that's in charge of that team, and that's that team sergeant, because that's the holy grail. And I went from being an intel sergeant to being a team sergeant, and what an honor! What an honor!
How long were you in the reserves?
Well, active in reserve, 27 and a half years.
27 and a half years. So you retired when?
96-ish, 1996, somewhere in there.
Or 94?
94.
When the company shut down,
right.
When you retired. And then how much longer after? Because as you were in the police, you were also promoted up. You went up the line.
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting, because I kept taking tests for promotion in the police department, but I think one of the things that kept getting in the way was the fact that I was so actively involved in the reserve program as well. And it was so what I did is as soon as the company was disbanded, all of a sudden I hit the fast track. I got promoted from officer to corporal, and 6 months later I was promoted to sergeant. Spent 5 years as a sergeant, and then shortly thereafter I was 5 or 6 years as a sergeant, and then I was promoted to a lieutenant. That's why I'm wearing the shirt. It's not because I was a lieutenant in the Army. It's because as soon as I got promoted to lieutenant at the police department, and it was shortly after Forrest Gump came out, naturally it was Lieutenant Dan, and that's why I've got the T-shirt on.
So you're now retired from the Salem Police Department.
Retired from the police department after 32 years. I've been retired in 2010.
Okay, we are sort of picking up from you retired from the Salem Police Department. You retired from the Army Reserve after 20, how many years was it?
27 years.
27 years total. Just a couple of questions. Getting back onto the reserve time. I know you got to go to a lot of different interesting places. If you think back, what are some of the highlights of the trips that you took that really stick out in your mind?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, the very first thing and part of the qualification is we went down to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and it's kind of funny going down there, because it was the first time in my life I saw E6s and E7s doing KP. but in Special Forces, that's what you did. And going back even a little bit further, I felt a little bit fortunate going through training, because I'd already done my time in Vietnam. I was a combat veteran. I had a CIB. I wasn't jump qualified yet. I had to go to jump school. And frankly, the fact that I had a CIB on my chest, I think it paid great dividends in helping me get through the program, because, not that that's anything to keep you from getting qualified. I think people look at that and realize that you've paid your dues, or you paid some dues getting to that point, and which I don't know whether it did or not, but it just seemed like it had some impact, and I think it also had some impact just getting into the unit and being accepted and being able to do some things. So I think that was it was a bonus to me, and but. As I said, I got to go to the ONI course. I got to go through the SF operations course to become a team sergeant, and And it's funny, because you go through this stuff and you do it because, one, you have to get your qualifications, and you don't realize how significant it really is. And so, when I reflect back on this stuff, I think I'm just a normal guy. And I do normal things. I've just had some very unique and extraordinary opportunities to do the things that I did and to be successful. And I guess the other thing is throughout this whole thing is you learn that you just never quit. And I've had conversations with a lot of people that have gone through this training, or they've got kids that are involved in this training. And it's like, what makes us successful and what causes other people to fail? And the bottom line is, we just didn't quit. That wasn't part of our makeup. We just didn't quit. We just kept driving on and doing what we did. And we were able to be successful doing what we're doing. So I had all the opportunities. My biggest regret, I probably should have gone on with and extended in my reserve career, because I could have been, should have been, or I guess I could have been a sergeant major. I've been able to finish at the top of the heap, I guess it was. In the police department, I stuck with it, and I retired as a lieutenant. I probably could have tried a little harder and been a deputy chief, but you know what? I had some different priorities, and that became more important than promotion, and I took advantage of those. And in retrospect, that was more important to me. And one of those is sitting right there. I got grandkids and kids that I wanted to be part of their life and not gone all the time. So now the beauty is I'm at a point in my life where I get to take advantage of that, and I get to do some traveling, and I get to go anywhere that doesn't start with Fort and visit those places. So in police work, again, I took advantage of opportunities that I had, because while I may not have recognized it, somebody else recognized it for me. And I think that was one of the other things that I did through, and I said, okay, I didn't become a school teacher, but I've been a teacher my whole life. And I brought up a lot of kids, and as an operations sergeant, I got to work with some great commanders, one of whom became a two-star general, many of whom have become full colonels, who've gone on to lead combat teams in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've gone on to be medics and physician's assistants and doctors and attorneys, and so in some way, shape, or form, you have an influence on people. And I think, when you look back on what we've done and how we got to where we're at, is somebody had an influence on us. And fortunately, we can turn around and have an influence on somebody else as well. And that pretty much sums it up. And my success now is I'm still married after 49 years. I've got 2 great kids who have 2 great families. I got 6 grandkids, and we still get a chance to have a good time and hang out together and do things together and be a part of their lives now.